The prairie stretched endlessly beneath a bruised sky, where smoke from distant fires hung like ghosts above the land. War had turned everything into ashes. The settlers whispered of the Comanche as shadows of vengeance, and the Comanche whispered of settlers as destroyers of sacred ground. Between those whispers, the wind carried the cries of the dying. Among those who rode at the heart of this storm was Tahu Redhawk, the fiercest leader the southern plains had ever known. His enemies feared him, his people followed him, and yet, on this night, he was alone. Tahu had always believed a warrior's end should be met standing, weapon in hand, facing the rising sun. But betrayal does not come in daylight, it comes in silence. His own brothers in arms had turned against him at dawn. Greed for leadership and jealousy of his legend had poisoned their hearts. Arrows hissed through the air, cutting through morning mist, striking his shoulder and side. He fought like a trapped wolf, his knife red with the blood of those who once called him brother. Then came the final blow, a spear that knocked him from his horse and sent him tumbling into the ravine below. When he awoke, the sun had set, and his horse was gone. He tried to move, but pain seared through his body. His breath came in ragged gasps, the smell of iron and dust thick in the air. Around him, the canyon walls loomed high and cold, trapping him like a grave. His lips cracked as he tried to call out, but only a whisper escaped. For 2 days he lay there, no food, no water, no hope, his mind slipping between memories of the hunt and the sound of his mother's voice from long ago. The Great Spirit tests the heart of those he loves most. When you have nothing left, you find what you truly are. He wanted to believe her, but the truth was harder than faith. He was dying. His tribe had left him, his enemies would soon claim the plains, and all he could do was stare at the endless sky above. A hawk circled overhead, patient, waiting. He almost welcomed it, but miles away, a very different world stirred, a small wooden cabin on the edge of a settler's field, surrounded by withering corn and a sagging fence that had seen better years. Inside, little Ellie Mae Thompson sat near the window, clutching her worn-out doll. The night wind rattled the shutters, and in the dim lamplight, her face looked too solemn for her 7 years. Her mother's picture hung above the fireplace, a reminder of the warmth that had vanished from the home when fever took her. Her father did his best, he worked the land, fixed the fences, prayed at night, but grief had carved lines into his once kind face. Ellie could feel the emptiness even when he smiled. That evening, the storm rolled in sudden and wild. Thunder cracked over the plains, and rain began to fall in silver sheets. Boone, their hound, started barking at the door, his ears pricked toward the hills. Ellie followed his gaze through the rain-streaked window. Beyond the field, lightning flashed over the ridge, lighting up the dark outline of the canyon. She thought she heard something faint, a moan, maybe a cry. "Boone, what is it?" she whispered, pulling on her coat and boots. The dog barked again, whining this time, pacing back and forth. Her father was gone, he had ridden to the next town for supplies. No one would stop her. So she lit her lantern, tucked her doll under her arm for courage, and stepped into the storm. The rain soaked her hair and stung her face as she followed Boone up the rocky path. The wind howled, tugging at her clothes, but she kept going, one small step at a time. The ground grew slippery, and once she slipped, scraping her knee on the sharp stones, but she didn't cry. Something, she didn't know what, pushed her forward. When she reached the edge of the ridge, she held her lantern high and peered down. That's when she saw him. A man lay below, half buried in the dirt, his body still but not lifeless. His skin was darkened by sun and blood, his chest faintly rising and falling. Ellie's heart pounded in her ears. She had heard the men talk about the Comanche, their savagery, their raids, but this man didn't look like a monster. He looked broken. Without thinking, she tied the lantern to a branch and began climbing down, gripping rocks with trembling hands. When she finally reached him, she fell to her knees beside his body. "Sir," she whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. No answer. His skin burned with fever, his lips dry and cracked. She reached for her canteen and poured a little water onto a piece of cloth, pressing it to his mouth. His throat moved weakly as he swallowed. For a moment, his eyes flickered open. Deep brown, almost black, filled with confusion and pain. Ellie gasped and pulled her hand back, afraid. But he didn't move, he just stared at her, as if she were a ghost. "Water," he croaked, his voice rough like gravel. She held the canteen to his lips, watching as he drank a few sips before falling back into silence. She sat there, uncertain what to do. The rain was easing now, and the air smelled of wet earth. She looked around. No one would come this far. He would die here, alone, unless she helped him. Her father's words echoed in her memory. If someone's in need, Ellie girl, you do what you can. Doesn't matter who they are. So she did. She ran all the way home, her small boots splashing through puddles. She gathered what she could, an old quilt, a piece of bread, and another canteen of water. Then she slipped back into the night, Boone trotting beside her as if guarding her mission. When she returned, the man was still breathing, though faintly. She laid the quilt over him, crumbled the bread into pieces, and placed one near his mouth. He was too weak to eat, so she chewed a piece first, then pressed it to his lips gently. As the hours passed, she stayed by his side. Sometimes she talked, telling him stories about her mother and the stars and how she missed the songs they used to sing. She didn't know if he could hear her, but she talked anyway. It made the dark less frightening. By the time dawn came, his fever had lessened. His eyes opened again, more alert now, and he studied her face. "Why, help me?" he asked, struggling to form the words. Ellie shrugged, her voice small but sure. "Because you're hurt." He looked at her a long time, trying to understand. In his world, mercy was rare, and trust was a weapon. Yet here she was, a child, unarmed, unafraid, giving him life. Something inside him, something long buried beneath years of blood and vengeance, stirred. He didn't know what to call it. As the sun rose over the canyon, its light spilling across the wounded land, Tahu Redhawk closed his eyes and whispered a silent vow. He would live, not for himself, not for pride or revenge, but for the little girl who refused to let him die in the dirt. That night, when Ellie returned to her cabin, she looked back at the ridge and thought she saw an eagle circling above. She smiled faintly, not knowing that in saving him, she had just changed the fate of a man who once believed mercy no longer existed in this world. The days that followed melted into weeks, and the bond between the wounded warrior and the little girl grew in ways neither could have imagined. Each morning, when the mist still hung low over the prairie and her father's wagon disappeared down the dirt road, Ellie Mae packed a small bundle of bread, jerky, and a canteen of water. Boone would wag his tail, knowing where they were going. Together they climbed the rocky slope to the hidden cave above the canyon, a secret place now alive with whispers of healing and trust. Inside, Tahu Redhawk rested upon a bed of pine branches and an old quilt Ellie had brought. His wounds, once raw and angry, had begun to close, though he still winced when he moved his leg. His eyes, once sharp with suspicion, softened whenever she appeared. He was a proud man, not used to being cared for, especially not by a child from the very people his tribe once called enemies. Yet every time she came, carrying her little lantern and her innocent courage, something within him stirred that was deeper than gratitude. It was faith returning, piece by piece. Ellie talked constantly. She told him about her mother, about the songs she used to hum while baking bread. She told him about her father's struggles, the ranch falling apart, the loneliness that filled the small cabin at night. She spoke with the simplicity only a child could have, no bitterness, no judgment, just truth. Tahu listened in silence, nodding, sometimes closing his eyes as if the sound of her voice stitched something unseen within him. In return, he began to teach her. One morning, when she arrived and found him sitting upright for the first time, he pointed toward a set of faint tracks outside the cave. "Dear," he said in his low voice, rough but steady. "Not far." Ellie crouched beside him, squinting. "How can you tell?" He smiled faintly, "A rare thing. Feet speak if you listen." And so she listened. She learned how to read the language of the earth, the shape of a hoof, the bend of a broken branch, the way the wind carried scent and sound. He showed her how to be still, how to let nature move around her instead of forcing her way through it. When she grew restless, he'd say, "Patience is the first strength of the strong." She didn't always understand, but she remembered every word. To her, he was not a savage or a warrior anymore. He was simply, Tahu, her friend. But in the small town below, fear was growing. The settlers had begun whispering about a lone Comanche seen in the hills. Soldiers had been spotted nearby, and Ellie's father came home one evening with worry carved into his face. He set his rifle by the door and said, "If any of those red men come near, Ellie, you stay inside. You understand, they ain't safe." Ellie nodded, but her heart twisted with guilt. How could she tell him that the man he feared was the same one she'd been saving all along? She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the coyotes call across the plains. Her father didn't understand. Tahu wasn't like the stories they told. He wasn't cruel, he was kind in ways she couldn't explain. The next morning, she woke early and went to the cave with a heavier heart. When Tahu saw her face, he knew something was wrong. "They come," he asked quietly. "Soldiers," she whispered. "They're looking for you. My pa says they're gonna search the ridge soon." Tahu looked toward the open valley. The wind carried the faint smell of smoke and gunpowder. "Then I must go." Ellie's eyes widened. "You can't yet. You're still hurt." He shook his head. "If they find me here, they hurt you too." But she wouldn't hear it. "They won't find you. I'll help you hide." For the first time since they met, he raised his voice. "No, you go. Forget this place. Forget me." Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to move. "I can't. You're my friend." Those words hit him harder than any blade ever had. He turned away, his jaw tight. For so long, he had lived believing the world was built on loyalty and betrayal, on tribes and enemies. But this little girl, fragile and brave, had shattered that truth with nothing but kindness. When the sound of hoofbeats echoed faintly across the canyon that afternoon, Ellie did the unthinkable. She ran down the hill, waving her small arms to get the soldiers' attention. "I saw tracks," she shouted, pointing toward the east, away from the cave. They went that way. The men thanked her and rode off, dust rising behind them. Only when they were gone did she return to the ridge, breathless and trembling. Tahu stood waiting near the shadows, his eyes filled with something between awe and sorrow. "You saved me," he said softly. Ellie wiped her eyes and gave a weak smile. "Now we're even." He laughed, a deep, warm sound that startled her at first. "No, little bird," he said, calling her by the name he'd given her. "A warrior never equals the heart of a child. I owe you my life." That evening, as the sun bled red and gold across the plains, they sat side by side at the cave's mouth. She leaned her head on her knees, and he told her stories of his people, how they believed every star was an ancestor watching over the living, and how courage was not in killing, but in surviving with honor. His voice grew softer as he spoke, and for a while, she forgot the world outside even existed. But the world did not forget them. A few days later, the valley filled with soldiers once again. This time, they rode in larger numbers, shouting orders, their rifles glinting in the light. Ellie and her father watched from their cabin porch as the troops searched every ridge. She bit her lip until it bled, praying they wouldn't find the cave. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "They're hunting the last of them," he murmured. "It's time this land was safe again." Safe. The word made her stomach twist. Safe for who? When the soldiers left, the hills looked emptier than ever. Ellie ran to the canyon, her heart pounding with dread. The cave was empty, the pine bed gone. Only the faint scent of smoke and something carved into the dirt remained, a simple drawing of a bird, wings spread wide. Beneath it lay an eagle feather and a small stone carving shaped by careful hands. She picked it up, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Boone whined beside her, nudging her arm. "He's gone, Boone," she whispered. "He's gone home." The seasons changed, and the years passed. The land grew quiet again, the scars of war fading into stories whispered around campfires. Ellie grew older, her hair darkened with age, but her spirit stayed bright. She took over her father's small ranch after he passed, tending the fields, raising horses, and living by the same lessons she had once taught a dying man: mercy, patience, courage. One evening, as the sun sank behind the distant hills, she stood on the ridge where it had all begun. The wind tugged at her hair, and the sky glowed the same crimson hue she remembered from that day. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the eagle feather, its edges worn now, but still whole. Then she saw it. Far across the valley, a lone rider sat on horseback, still as stone, watching her. His hair streaked with gray, his shoulders broad and proud beneath a blanket of woven color. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he lifted his hand, a silent salute. Ellie smiled through her tears and raised the feather high in return. When she blinked, he was gone, riding toward the horizon where the sky met the earth. But she didn't feel sadness. She felt peace. She had once saved a dying warrior, but in truth, he had saved her too, taught her that compassion could conquer fear, that kindness could survive even in the harshest of worlds. And as the last light faded from the plains, Ellie whispered into the wind, "Fly safe, little bird," not knowing whether she spoke to him or to the memory of the child she once was. The wind carried her words away, soft and endless, just like the bond that had begun so long ago. Between a lost Comanche leader and the little girl who refused to let him die.